There was a table set out under a tree in front of a house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea at it. A dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice. Only, as it's asleep, I suppose it doesn't mind. "No room! No room!" they cried out when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice indignantly, and she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. "Have some wine," said the March Hare in an encouraging tone. Alice looked all round the table, but there was nothing on it but tea. "I don't see any wine," she remarked. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Well, then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it," said Alice angrily. "Well, it wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited." "I didn't know it was your table," said Alice. "It's laid for a great many more than 3. "Your hair wants cutting," said the Hatter. He'd been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. "You should learn not to make personal remarks," said Alice. "It's very rude." The Hatter opened his eyes very wide on hearing this, but all he said was, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" "I believe I can guess that," said Alice. "Do you mean you think you can find out the answer to it?" said the March Hare. "Exactly so," said Alice. "Well, then, you should say what you mean," said the March Hare. I do," said Alice. At least I mean what I say, and that's the same thing, you know." "Not the same thing a bit," said the Hatter. "You might as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see." "You might just as well say," added the March Hare, "that I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like." You might just as well say," added the Dormouse, who seemed to be talking in its sleep, "that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe." "It is the same thing with you," said the Hatter. And here the conversation dropped, and the party sat silent for a moment. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. "What day of the month is it?" he said, turning to Alice. "The 4th, Alice said. "Oh, 2 days wrong," sighed the Hatter. "I told you butter wouldn't suit the works," he said angrily to the March Hare. It was the best butter," the March Hare meekly replied. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. "Have you guessed the riddle yet?" the Hatter said, turning to Alice. "No, I give it up," said Alice. "What's the answer?" "Well, I haven't the slightest idea," said the Hatter. "Nor I," said the March Hare. Alice sighed wearily. "I think you might do something better with the time," she said, "than wasting it in asking riddles that have no answers." "If you knew time as well as I do, you wouldn't talk about wasting it." "It's him." "I don't know what you mean," said Alice. "Of course you don't," the Hatter said, tossing his head contemptuously. "I dare say you've never even spoke to time." "Oh, perhaps not," said Alice, "but I know I have to beat time when I learn music." Well, that accounts for it," said the Hatter. "He won't stand beating. Now, if you only kept on good terms with him, he'd do almost anything you liked with the clock. For instance, supposing it were 9 o'clock in the morning, just time for lessons to begin, you'd only have to whisper a hint to time, and round goes the clock in a twinkling. 1:30, time for dinner. Is that the way you manage?" asked Alice. Oh, not I, sighed the Hatter mournfully. We quarreled last March, just before he went mad, you know, he said, pointing with his teaspoon at the March Hare. It was at a great concert given by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing, Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you're at. You know the song, perhaps? I've heard something like it, said Alice. It goes on, you know, the Hatter said. In this way, up above the world so high, like a tea tray in the sky, twinkle, 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 twinkle. And here, the dormouse shook itself and began singing in its sleep, a twinkle, 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 and went on so long they had to pinch it on both sides to make it stop. Well, I'd hardly finished the first verse, said the Hatter, when the Queen jumped up and bawled out, he's murdering the time off with his head! How dreadfully savage, said Alice. Well, and ever since then, the Hatter went on, he won't do a thing I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. Supposing we change the subject, Sir the March Hare interrupted, yawning. I'm getting rather tired of this. I bet the young lady tells us a story. I'm afraid I don't know one, said Alice, rather alarmed at the proposal. Then the dormouse shall, they said, and pinched it on both sides at once. Wake up, dormouse! The dormouse slowly opened his eyes. I wasn't asleep, he said in a hoarse, feeble voice. I heard every word you fellows were saying. Tell us a story, said the March Hare. Oh, yes, please do, said Alice. And be quick about it or you'll be asleep again before it's done, added the Hatter. Once upon a time there were 3 little sisters, the Dormouse began in a great hurry, and their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, and they lived in the bottom of a well. What did they live on? Said Alice, who always took great interest in questions of eating and drinking. They lived on treacle, said the Dormouse after thinking a minute or two. They couldn't have done that, Alice remarked gently. They'd have been ill. So they were, said the Dormouse. Very ill. Why did they live at the bottom of a well? Inquired Alice. The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it and then said, "But it was a treacle well. There's no such thing," Alice was beginning very angrily. But the Hatter and the March Hare went, "Shh, shh, shh." And the Dormouse sulkily remarked, "If you can't be civil, you'd better finish the story for yourself." "Oh, no, please go on," Alice said very humbly. "I won't interrupt again. I dare say there may be one." "One indeed," said the Dormouse indignantly. However, he consented to go on. "And so these 3 little sisters, they were learning to draw, you know." "What did they draw?" said Alice, quite forgetting her promise. "Treacle," the Dormouse said, without considering at all this time. "But I don't understand. Where did they draw the treacle from?" "Well, you can draw water out of a water well. So I should think you can draw treacle out of a treacle well. Eh, stupid?" said the Hatter. "They were learning to draw," the Dormouse went on, yawning and rubbing its eyes, for it was getting terribly sleepy. And they drew all manner of things. Everything beginning with an M." "Why with an M?" said Alice. "Why not?" said the March Hare. Alice was silent. The Dormouse had closed its eyes by this time and was going off into a doze. But on being pinched by the Hatter, it woke up again with a little shriek and went on, "Oh, that begins with an M, such as mousetraps and moon and memory and muchness." You know the saying, things are much of a muchness. Or did you ever see such a thing as a drawing of a muchness? Really, now you ask me, said Alice, very much confused. I don't think... Then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She got up in great disgust and walked off.
Ladies and gentlemen, Grace Chilton.